The dog-mauling murder of Diane Whipple began with a shit-stained soup ladle that was hidden in the ass of an incarcerated white supremacist who went by the name of Paul Cornfed Schneider. The inmate had carefully honed his jailhouse shiv to a razor-sharp edge and then secreted away the blade deep inside of himself. Cornfed Schneider was scheduled to appear in court to testify in a trial for fellow Aryan Brotherhood member Todd Ashker. Once inside the courtroom, he retrieved the soup ladle from his rectum and attacked a defense attorney from Sacramento by the name of Philip Cousins. The only way authorities were able to determine how exactly Schneider managed to sneak his shiv into court was one ominous clue. The defense attorney's stab wounds were infected with feces.
Breaking news here. A woman who's serving time in a high-profile dog-mauling case you may well remember was just denied parole. Marjorie Knoller showed no emotion as the parole commissioner announced the decision just a short time ago, minutes ago, in fact. She was convicted of second-degree murder and is serving a sentence of 15 years to life. The board says one reason parole was denied was due to disciplinary action against Knoller while in prison. She and her late husband, Robert Noel, owned two dogs that attacked and killed the couple's neighbor, Diane Whipple, in January of 2001 outside her apartment. Noel served 4 years for involuntary manslaughter.
Now, California's efforts to desegregate its prisons. NewsHour correspondent Jeffrey Kay of KCET Los Angeles reports.
For 3 decades, California state prisons have practiced racial segregation.
Enemies? Besides the Northern active members? None?
As convicts enter the system, guards invariably assign bunks in cells and dormitories to prisoners of the same race. Inmates generally support the practice.
I don't want to integrate.
I'm sorry?
I wouldn't want to integrate around here.
Why not?
Not good for your health.
Not safe.
Yeah.
Prisoners say for their survival, they must demonstrate loyalty to racial gangs which are hostile to each other. California's prison gangs are notorious for their power and their numbers, says Mark Valenti, a correctional officer at the Dual Vocational Institute, one of California's 33 state prisons.
Okay, in all institutions you have the Southern Hispanics, which are mainly from Fresno south. You have the Northern Hispanics from Fresno up. You have the blacks, they have the Crips, they have the Bloods, you have white Aryan Brotherhood type gangs, and the inmates fight for control of what they have in here.
Brown. Officials have justified their unwritten policy of assigning cellmates by skin color, saying it curbs interracial violence. But that practice has been challenged. Attorney Burt Dykesler represents a black prisoner, Garrison Johnson, who sued the California prison system over its policy of segregated housing.
170,000 people a year are subject to this kind of behavior, which is not tolerated in any other aspect of American life and hasn't been for 50 years. It's the shame of California.
What's your last name?
Dykesler argued that not only is the segregation unconstitutional, it actually strengthens racial prison gangs.
Guy comes off a bus and they look at his skin color and they say he's African American, put him there. The second fellow comes off the bus, they say he's African American, they put him with the first African American. If the first guy is a member of a gang and the second guy isn't, well, he's just assigned a roommate who's going to convert him to the gang. If they're members of opposite quarreling gangs, we've now just created an environment in which cellmates can try to kill one another. And so the whole system makes absolutely no sense.
The U.S. Supreme Court agreed, and a year ago ordered California to take steps to desegregate its prison housing. So last December, state prison authorities announced they would phase in racial desegregation starting on March the 1st of this year.
And I've been assured that the training sessions are ongoing and that this will be successfully rolled out as scheduled.
But that scheduled start date has come and gone. There's been no training, no new system rolled out, and prison authorities admit desegregation is still a long way off.
We're looking at conservatively between 12 to 16 months.
Victor Almager, associate warden at Dual, is a member of a task force working on racial integration in the prisons. He says the delay is due in part to the time it takes to modify the system of record keeping and collect data on all inmates.
So that will take some time for us to do. Once we've accomplished the coding, once we've accomplished training for our staff, information to both offenders, staff, and the public, and we have coded all of the offenders, then we can begin our housing protocol.
But racial desegregation will be an uphill battle. The gangs have a lot at stake and use racial solidarity as a means of control.
Since I was a young kid.
34-year-old Andre Williams has spent most of his adult life behind bars. He says he'd be in danger from other African Americans if he associates with other races.
They're going to downlook you for that. And you might get jumped, you might get slashed, you might get cut. It just promotes a problem.
You might be assaulted just for bunking with someone of the opposite
outside your race because you're going against the standards and the morals of the prison.
Latino and white inmates have similar standards.
It is a code, and it's basically death before dishonor. That's it. That's it. If you don't comply by those rules, you're going to be complied to.
The inmates' racial rules require obedience to a code that forbids prisoners from exercising with, bunking with, or eating with inmates of other races.
I'm pretty new to this, so I'm considered one of the soldiers. And when something comes up and happens within my car or within the white race, period, then I'm going to have to get up and I'm going to have to put it down.
Guards are also worried that racial integration could spark violence. Chuck Alexander is executive vice president of the California Correctional Peace Officers Association, the prison guards union. He says an inmate could try to sabotage desegregation plans by attacking a guard.
Because by doing that, he then goes into an administrative segregation setting, et cetera, and he doesn't lose face with the other individuals that were trying to get him to do something, because assaulting an officer kind of gives him a free pass, so to speak.
The guards' fears seem borne out. Inmates told us that racial integration would bring resistance, even if it means going into maximum security, aka the hole.
If they implement it, okay, what's going to happen is in a breakdown mode, first bunk that happens, the person's going to refuse to go bunk with that race, refuse to go eat with that race. They're going to refuse. Then they're going to go to the hole. Then the holes are going to be filled because everybody's going to have to follow that suit.
Being in and out of the system for years that I've seen and done things here, it could get ugly. It could really get ugly. And behind closed doors, a lot of sneaky and dirty things happen.
The U.S. Supreme Court has ruled that racial segregation can be used in a limited way for security. That was the tactic used recently in a Los Angeles County jail racked by race riots. Fighting between Latinos and African Americans left 2 inmates dead and more than 100 injured. To diffuse tension, L.A. County Sheriff Lee Baca, the man in charge of the jail system, decided racial segregation was a necessity.
We have been separating the Hispanics and the African American inmates where the disturbances have been occurring, and we're doing it as a temporary provision, obviously to calm things down. I think the segregation will last until the fighting has subsided to the point where we can reintegrate on a safer basis.
But in the state system, prison officials acknowledge that despite intentions, they will never be able to racially integrate many prisoners because of their propensity for violence.
For instance, you may have offenders who have a history of predatory violence towards other races. You may have offenders who have a propensity towards violence towards any cell partner. So we have to look at the case factors because their strategy is security and control.
Because of that control, authorities realize color barriers won't be easily broken. And they expect that if desegregation does take place, once inmates leave their racially integrated cells and go out to the yards or to the dining halls, old patterns of self-segregation will continue.
Spencer Michaels has the prison story.
At a prison near San Diego, nearly 450 inmates live in 3 crowded gymnasiums because there is no other housing available. Some sleep in triple bunk beds. Longer sentences and tougher sentencing laws, especially for drug crimes, have made overcrowding the rule in California prisons. With 162,000 prisoners in 33 prisons, this is the largest prison system in the free world, with a budget larger than that of the University of California. Harsher treatment has also been the rule for at least 2 decades. Weights and other bodybuilding equipment popular with prisoners were banned. New prison designs are more sterile and controlling. Lockdowns are more frequent. And there have been alleged abuses of the system that have contributed to tensions and violence. Guards were accused of staging fights among inmates and then shooting at them. This prison surveillance video from Corcoran Prison shows one of those incidents. Between 1989 and 95, 7 inmates died, 43 were injured. The U.S. Attorney brought criminal civil rights charges, still pending, against 8 guards.
These defendants used their authority to sponsor blood sports. In the process, they violated the civil rights of the individuals and abused their power and the public trust.
The Corcoran incidents, plus the statewide conditions due to overcrowding and the prevalence of prison gangs, have many people saying the system is ripe for change. Much of the motivation for that change comes from a fear of what will happen when large numbers of people are released. About half of all California prisoners are let out on parole every 2 years. Many are unprepared for life on the outside, according to sociology professor Elliot Curry.
The vast majority of people that we put behind bars are coming out. They're going to be on your street next year. And the question is, what kind of a guy do you want to be on your street next year? I think the real issue is, what are we going to do to make it less likely that he's going to be dangerous, to make it less likely that he's going to hurt somebody, that he's going to rob somebody?
There's no question that most prisoners have a hard time going straight once they're outside. 75% of them have no job, 50% are essentially illiterate, and 85% are substance abusers. Most of the inmates of the R.J. Donovan Correctional Facility, a medium-security prison just 2 miles from the Mexican border, have come back into custody several times. These prisoners say nothing inside has prepared them for the transition. Todd Perdue is serving his 4th term.
All I learned there was how to make knives out of coffee, out of coffee cans and out of plastic, and how to make bombs. I didn't really learn anything that would help me for society. And they dumped me out there with $200 gate money and say, make a life.
Donovan's warden, John Rattel, says the pressures on the outside may be too great for many inmates to handle.
We give him $200 parole money, and $200 if he doesn't have a place to go or a place, somewhere to go. And if he doesn't have a job, then what's he do? He's going to revert back to crime because he's got to survive. Sometimes people panic. And they go back to their same neighborhoods, the same places they came from, their buddies, peer pressure. A lot of those things play on a person's success or failure.
While incarcerated, the vast majority of state prisoners have little to do all day. Only 4%, or 7,000, work in prison industries like this bakery, which provides bread for other prisons. Often the minimal skills inmates learn here don't translate to jobs on the outside. Since prisoner-made products can be sold only to state institutions, the number of jobs is limited. Prisons also provide classes in printing and graphics and landscaping and other potential occupations. But at Donovan, only about 10% of the inmates are enrolled in these vocational training programs, about the same percentage statewide. Other inmates are ineligible because of disciplinary problems or a history of violence, or they're just not interested.
That's because you typed a lowercase k.
Academic and reading classes take place in all California prisons by law, and 10% of the inmates are enrolled in these programs as well. Sometimes the classes make a big difference, but often they don't reach the inmates who need them. Frederick Woods is an inmate clerk in the program.
There's a lot of inmates who are really interested and really willing to get into the program and get their education, but then there's a lot of them who are in the program who don't reap all the benefits because they really don't want the education.
Most experts believe nothing will work to make prisoners ready to function as citizens until the issue of their drug abuse is confronted. That is happening on a small scale at R.J. Donovan, where the system's first drug program has existed since 1990. But substance abuse is hardly addressed at all in most California prisons.
Some of you guys think that you don't have an addictive personality, and I would suggest that take a look at your cell again.
Donovan's effort was a pilot project involving 200 prisoners.
For me personally, I don't have any family, so it's been real easy for me to get back into that cycle of drugs and violence, and because of that, coming back to jail and prison. Coming through this has given me a support network, which is like a surrogate family. So that gives me people to fall onto when I need that help.
Let us celebrate this gift not only for ourselves. Let us celebrate this gift not only for ourselves, but for the
The cost of the drug program is $3,000 per inmate, on top of the $21,000 a year for keeping an inmate behind bars. Program advocates like the warden say the drug program actually saves money by keeping inmates from returning to prison.
You're saying it's cheaper to pay the extra money to do the drug program than it is to keep the guy in prison?
Absolutely. Well, to keep the guy from coming back to prison is a better term, I think.
Anybody listening to that argument?
Yeah, I think so. I think we're getting some recognition in the legislature. They've given us more money on substance abuse programs.
California will soon be providing drug programs for about 9,000 inmates, a huge increase. Corrections officials were swayed by a study which showed that the recidivism rate among inmates who completed substance abuse programs in prison and also after their release was only a third that of those who did not take part. Corrections Director Cal Terhune.
Yes, it's worth it. If you can cut down the recycling, it's going to be worth it. An investment at the front end in terms of prevention before they commit the crime is going to pay off in the long run.
In the study, the key to success was the drug treatment programs for parolees, like this one in San Francisco called Milestones.
My name's David, I'm an addict.
60 former inmates now on parole from state prison live for 6 months to a year in a residential facility where they have meetings, get help with substance abuse, job searches, health, and adjustment to society. Most of them had no access to drug programs inside prison.
I had a substance abuse problem when I went in and through my course of staying in the system. It's been like 12 years now, almost 13. Being inside, I felt that they don't deal with the issue. They'll tell you not to use drugs, but they don't tell you how to stay off of them.
The rehabilitation, they're not interested. We are a number. We are a statistic for the state of California, the California Department of Corrections.
These people have yet to make it. Even the few who got some treatment in prison emphasized the need for follow-up programs, which they didn't get until now.
And I finished the drug program, but then when I came out with a lot of issues, and I didn't follow up on my recovery, and I went back to prison 2 times more after that.
These parolees complained that both in-prison and aftercare programs like Milestones are scarce, and there's often a waiting list. Corrections officials agree.
Those are the kinds of programs that we're just very quietly spinning out. But there's a lot been done, and there's a lot more to do, but we're in the right direction.
In fact, the number of community beds for drug treatment has been increasing under state pressure. But politically, beefing up prison drug and education programs does not please some tough-on-crime politicians. Republican Assemblyman Jim Batten is skeptical of those plans.
If you go to prison for 18 months on a drug offense, you're not getting drugs for 18 months unless you're getting them within the prison. To have a drug treatment program inside a prison is almost nonsensical because they're denied the drugs. We have to make prisons a place of punishment, a place of deterrence, and that's a place of justice.
Batten does not want to change the purpose of the Department of Corrections, which right now is purely punishment.
There is an effort right now in the legislature to make prisons a place of rehabilitation first and punishment second, and it doesn't work. They tried to do that before. It's a failed policy of the left. It has not worked in the past. When we had that, we had people get early release. We had more victimization. We had higher crime rates.
Batten is opposing a bill by California Democratic Senator John Vasconcellos that would make one purpose of prison rehabilitation.
You include rehabilitation, is that the right word?
Yes, it is the right word. It's the right word, and it's the essential effort so that when people come out of prison, they don't, continue their actions and maraud the rest of us and go back to prison again. We pay some more money.
Vasconcellos says he doesn't want to ease up on punishment for criminals.
I'm not talking about not punishing, I'm just simply talking about doing it in a smart way so that when a person comes out, he isn't more rageful and more likely to make more trouble for me.
After 20 years of expensive prison construction and almost no concern for rehabilitation, Vasconcellos says that despite some opposition, he senses a political opening.
Times change, and people wake up, and issues get framed differently and recognized differently, and leaders are about trying to help that process happen, or ought to be.
California's prison building binge may be slowing down. Nonetheless, Democratic Governor Gray Davis recently signed a bill authorizing construction of yet another new prison.
By April of 2002, we'll be out of space entirely, double-celled everywhere, and we run the risk, if we did not do something, that a federal judge would order that prisoners be released before they serve their full sentence.
Elected as a tough-on-crime candidate, Davis has yet to be heard from on whether he will support major policy changes for this vast prison system.
What's going on, you guys? Welcome back. Another episode of Greenlit Gang TV. Hope you all had a blessed weekend. Hope you had a good day. Really quick, before jumping to this video, if you could, please like, subscribe, leave a comment. All three of those actions continue to really help this channel grow. I cannot thank any and all of you enough who have continued to support this channel. Thank you guys so much from the bottom of my heart. 2025 has been an amazing year, and it's seriously because of the viewers and the supporters of this channel. Okay, so like we talked about in the intro, we're going to be talking about a guy by the name of Paul Cornfed Schneider. And as of late, what we've been doing is reading from my favorite social media page and one of my favorite YouTube channels, Prison Chronicles. They have a really good post about Paul Cornfed Schneider. Let's read from that first, and then we're going to get into some good background information. The story goes off in a lot of different directions. We're going to be covering the dog mauling case, the court trial, and all that stuff. Paul Cornfed Schneider has spent most of his adult life incarcerated in the California prison system. His crimes include attempted murder, armed robbery, drug smuggling from within prison, and ordering robberies from behind bars. In 1990, he stabbed a defense attorney 4 times in a Sacramento courtroom. 2003, he received his 3rd life term for his role in a drug operation and the 1995 murder of a Sonoma County Sheriff's deputy. At one point, Schneider and fellow inmate Dale Bretches ran an illegal dog breeding operation named Dog O' War from inside Pelican Bay State Prison. The 2 Presa Canario dogs, Bane and Hera, those are some names, were intended to be guard dogs for drug labs. They were like Mexican cartel drug labs. These dogs, they started this business. Now, how they started this business, you'll find out in just a couple minutes. It's actually, or I shouldn't say started this business, how they got the funding to start this business. We'll get into that in just a minute. Cornfed's lawyers, husband and wife, Marjorie Knoller and Robert Noel, took possession of the dogs and brought them to their San Francisco apartment building. In a bizarre twist, the couple would illegally adopt Cornfed Schneider, who was then 38 years old, as their son. You can't make this shit up. On January 26, 2001, Diane Whipple, a 33-year-old college cross coach, was attacked by the 2 Presa Canario dogs in the hallway of her upscale San Francisco apartment building as she returned home with groceries. Knoller was leading the 2 dogs, each weighing over 100 pounds, more than both the women combined, right? Marjorie Knoller's walking them, 2 of them, 2 dogs weighing over 100 pounds. Here comes our victim, okay, Diane Whipple. From there, it was all bad. When the attack occurred, dragging her behind them as they mauled Whipple, she sustained 77 bite wounds across her body except her scalp and the soles of her feet. She would die hours later in the hospital from massive blood loss. Schneider's decision to give interviews to the media after the dog mauling case drew intense scrutiny to him and the AB, which reportedly marked him for assassination. So they put him in the hat, and basically for talking to the press. His subsequent transfer to a federal prison medical facility further fueled suspicion among gang members that he was a federal informant, and he was subsequently marked for death by the AB. All right, a little bit of background more on Diane Whipple. Born January 31st, 1967. She passed away, obviously, on January 26, 2001. American lacrosse player and college coach. And what's crazy about this, right, is the dogs were looked after by Schneider's attorneys, Robert Noel and Marjorie Knoller, a husband and wife who lived in the same apartment. After the attack, the state of California, they brought criminal charges against the attorneys. The husband, Noel, who wasn't present during the attack, he gets convicted of manslaughter. Noel's was a little bit more interesting and a little bit more convoluted because it's not like she meant for the dogs to kill him. But check this out. Noller, who was present, was charged with implied malice, second-degree murder, and convicted by the jury. Noller's murder conviction, an unusual result for an unintended dog attack, was rejected by the trial judge, but ultimately upheld. The case clarified the meaning of implied malice murder. Excuse me. Okay, now, I found a really good article that actually I read from the intro okay, about the soup ladle hidden in Cornfed's ass, and that's what he used to stab the defense attorney Philip Cousins from Sacramento. And we're going to keep reading from that. So, Cornfed Schneider goes on trial for the attack of the defense attorney, of Philip Cousins. So we're going to jump right into it here. In his later trial for the attack of Philip Cousins, Schneider would opt to plead guilty. And check this out. But he had one condition for his plea. He said, I will plead guilty, but I want my reward to be 2 pepperoni pizzas and a 2-liter of Pepsi for not wasting the court's time. He and a fellow inmate enjoyed the bounteous feast. This article is really well written. But then he went back on his word and sued the correction system for excessively x-raying him following his courtroom magic trick with the disappearing shiv. Using the money, and check this out, using the money he won from the lawsuit from the too much x-raying, and inspired by an ad in Dog Fancy, Cornfed Schneider says, I want to start a dog breeding business while I'm locked up with the help of an unmarried Mormon woman who fell in love with the guy known as the most dangerous man in the California prison system. You cannot make this shit up, man. God, I'm only a few minutes into this video and I'm already like, what? The stud dog that Schneider first purchased to start his dog breeding business was a Presa Canario named Bane. They're massive animals bred by Spaniards as work dogs who herd bulls. But unlike sheep dogs, Presa Canarios prefer to run up to a bull and bite its lip or ear and then drag the bull to the ground by its face. Schneider planned to breed and train Presa Canarios to work as ferocious guard dogs for the Mexican Mafia's meth labs. It's like a movie. But instead, Bane wound up being cared for by Schneider's married lawyers and kept in their Tony San Francisco Pacific Heights apartment where one day the hellhound mauled and killed his lawyer's neighbor. Nearly 20 years later, the case continues to make headlines. Not to mention one of the prosecutors on it was Kimberly Guilfoyle, who now spends her time on TV defending white supremacists like her boyfriend's father, President Trump. So obviously she's I don't know if she's married to him now, but she was dating. This article is a couple years old. President Donald Trump's son. She does have an appearance on a news program. But again, she was not the main prosecutor on this case. I just want to make that clear. January 26, 2001 was a Wednesday at around 4 p.m., 5 days before her 34th birthday. Diane Whipple arrived home from grocery shopping. Her apartment was on the 6th floor. The 33-year-old lacrosse coach was met in the hallway by her neighbor, a lawyer named Marjorie Noller. Noller recalled later that Whipple was standing in her open apartment door staring at Bane. Whipple made it known that she didn't like the dog and felt that Bane was dangerous. Most of their neighbors agreed. Days earlier, Whipple had confronted Noller's husband, Robert Knoll, about the couple's dogs. In a letter to Schneider, Knoll had written about the encounter. So Knoll writes Cornfed Schneider, quote, as soon as the elevator door opens at 6, one of our newer female neighbors, a timorous little mousy blonde who weighs less than Hera, is met by the dynamic duo exiting and almost had a coronary. Hera was the couple's other dog, also a Presa Canario, and also trained to protect Mexican meth labs. According to Noller, Whipple stared at the two dogs with disgust as Noller struggled to hold the massive dogs back. However, that was impossible. Eventually, Bane dragged Noller over to Whipple and her open apartment door. At some point, Whipple accused Noller of not controlling her dogs and said, quote, your dog jumped on me. The two women would then argue about the dog's behavior. Following their heated exchange, Noller claims she attempted to protect Whipple from her two massive dogs by pushing the lacrosse coach into her own apartment, but Whipple refused to be manhandled. I'll see. This is why we read stuff like this, guys, because it gives context to everything. Per Schneider's sister, who received a call from Noller the night of the attack, Noller said that she and Whipple, quote, got into it, and that Marjorie asked her to shut her door so she could take her dogs out in the hall. And that lady was like, quote, no, I'm not shutting my door. Now, fuck you. Noller and Knoll had only had the dogs for 3 months. Prior to that, they were being kept by Janet Combs, a Mormon woman who'd been talked into caring for the dogs for the incarcerated Cornfed Schneider. But Combs turned the 2 dogs over to his lawyers after Bain and Hera ate all of her sheep, all of her chickens, and her house cat. Holy shit. When Combs transferred the dogs to Noel or Noel, she warned them about the dog's bloodlust. The lawyers, however, didn't listen. And so when the Presa Canarios attacked Whipple in the hallway, she stood far less a chance than a fully grown bull. A 70-year-old neighbor, Esther Berkmeyer, heard the attack happening in the hallway. She rushed to her door and spied the scene through her peephole since she was scared of the dogs. She could see one dog atop of what she assumed was a woman. Although she couldn't see underneath the dogs attacking her, Berkmeyer could hear Whipple screaming, "Help me, help me." The terrified senior called 911 to report that the dogs were running wild in the apartment building. Another neighbor who assumed someone was being raped also called 911. Then a short moment later, Berkmeyer heard a bang at her front door. One of the Presa Canaries had slammed against it. She called 911 again. This time, Berkmeyer couldn't form coherent sentences and instead could only scream into the phone. As Berkmeyer recalled the Rolling Stone just after she called 911 for the second time, quote, "The barking stopped, the growling stopped, and then there was silence." When the police finally arrived nearly 7 minutes later, Whipple was lying on the floor naked. All of her clothing had been shredded by the dogs. Whipple's blood was splattered on the walls of the hallway. It soaked into the carpet in pools. Officer Alec Cardenas, a medic from police SWAT team, found Whipple somehow still gripping to life. He said she tried to push herself up from the floor and drag herself into the apartment. Her throat had been ripped open, her larynx crushed. She'd lost most of her blood. Noah emerged from her apartment. She was also covered in blood. She'd secured the dogs. Noah recalled Whipple's final moments of life, which were witnessed only by her. Her retelling is tragic, but mostly because she blames Whipple for her own death, saying, quote, "I told her to stay still. If she had, this would have never happened." Officers entered Noah and Noah's apartment to deal with the deadly dogs. They found Bain locked up in the bathroom. The dog's black and tan, tiger-striped coat and white teeth were painted with Whipple's blood. The bathroom floor was covered in dog shit. Animal control officers arrived on scene and shot Bain with 3 tranq darts strong enough to put down a dog of enormous size. 15 minutes later, though, Bain was clear-eyed and unaffected. I'm going to pause right there. So the bathroom was covered in dog shit, so that means they already weren't taking care of these dogs. Eventually, the animal control officers collared the dog with 2 poles and dragged him outside the apartment building and put him down for good with 25 cc's of sodium phenobarbital. Meanwhile, emergency responders rushed Whipple to the hospital where she later died from heart seizure. There simply wasn't enough blood in her body to keep her heart beating. Much like an engine without oil, her heart seized up and stopped functioning. The horror of the crime would claim other victims as well. According to the New York Times, the bloodbath in the hallway was so horrific that police officers at the scene had to receive trauma counseling. Paul Cornfed Schneider was born in 1962 and raised by a strict retired military stepfather. I'm not going to lie, that was one of the harder things I've ever had to read. And that's crazy. Sorry, I jumped into the next paragraph, but I'm just like, I gotta pause. That's insane. Paul Cornfed Schneider was born in 1962 and raised by a strict retired military stepfather. His sister describes her childhood home as a battleground between the 2 men. Quote, "Our house was a prison and our stepdad was the warden." She said that her stepfather sexually abused her and physically abused her brother. She's also described the boy who would grow up to become Cornfed Schneider as, quote, "very protective of me." She claims her brother stood up to her stepdad, who used to beat the shit out of Paul. Schneider was first locked up in 1985. He had clocked the LAX habits of the armed guards who regularly visited the supermarket where his girlfriend worked and decided they were a ripe target. So one day, he robbed them. He got away with roughly $100,000. He bought himself a new motorcycle with the stolen loot. He rode it out to his stepdad's place to show him his new bike. Unimpressed and wholly convinced his stepson had been the one to rob the local supermarket, Schneider's stepfather phoned the police, not a piece of shit, and turned his stepson in. After he was apprehended, tried, convicted, and sentenced, Schneider was sent to New Folsom State Prison. Behind bars, Schneider became the man he is today, a murderous white supremacist considered so dangerous that to transport him to court in San Francisco, the Bay Bridge had to be shut down by the California Highway Patrol. He was originally sentenced for armed robbery. However, in 1987, he joined the AB, Aryan Brotherhood. To be accepted by the prison gang, he had to stab a prison guard in the neck, which he did. That earned him a life sentence and a pair of tattoos, an A and B inked on his right hand. Schneider was eventually transferred to the max security facility, Pelican Bay. Deep inside that home for the state's worst offenders, he was locked up in solitary confinement in an 11 by 7.5 foot cell for 22 hours a day. 3 years later, in 1990, when Schneider was brought to court to testify as a witness in another inmate's case, is when he stabbed Cousins with a soup ladle he had pulled from his rectum. That scored him a second life sentence. Then, in 2003, he received a third life sentence for the arranging the murder of a sheriff's deputy. In the meantime, Schneider sued the correction system for all those x-rays, meant to prevent another soup ladle shiv stabbing. He won and received $11,666, the money he used to buy Bain. Not gonna lie, seeing that $11,666, knowing he's an AB member, how that correlates and represents, it's crazy. The name has a darkness all its own. In Old English, it means, quote, killer, slayer, murderer, worker of death. In early Germanic, it means wound. And in Old Norse, it means death, or, quote, that which causes death. Since Schneider was locked up in solitary confinement, he obviously didn't have the space to raise and trace Bain and the puppies he planned to breed. So Schneider used the Mormon missionaries who visited the prison as his unwitting partners. Quote, she told me I wasn't doing my Christian duty by not going with her to the prison to help other inmates, is how Janet Combs recalls a friend first urging her to minister to prisons like Schneider. Schneider was 38 at the time, romanced Combs with letters and plied her with sweet words during her missionary visits. Over time, he convinced the lonely woman to allow him to store his dogs on her rural property and to care for and feed them as if they were the couple's own furry children. God. She lived with her teenage daughter in Hayfork, a small town in rural Northern California. A single mother, she and her daughter Daisy squeaked by with her disability check and one income they could pull out of a small farm where they raised lambs. Adding some dogs to the mix didn't seem like a large ask, especially if Schneider gave her money for the food and medical care for the puppies. But in the months that Bain was on the farm, he killed whatever animals he could, including, like I mentioned, her beloved house cat. Yet despite its bloodlust, it wasn't Bain that ruined the setup to Schneider had arranged with Combs. It was Schneider himself. Quote, she kept dropping hints about how she wanted me to convert to Mormon and marry her, is how Schneider recalled the trouble. His unwillingness to do so is why Combs eventually quit the dog breeding business. But when she didn't make plans to remove the dogs from her farm, Schneider threatened her life. Quote, things can happen to your home, Combs says he warned her. The threat was taken seriously enough that Janet Combs no longer lives on her farm in Hayfork, raising sheep. She's now in the Witness Protection Program. That's crazy. He arranged for Bain to be handed over to Marjorie Knoller and Robert Noel, 46 and 60 years old respectively, at the time of the dog mauling case. The married lawyers decided to keep them in their 6th floor Pacific Heights apartment. Their place had picturesque views of the Golden Gate Bridge, but the dogs quickly soured such perks for everyone else in the building. Their neighbors, in fact, were terrified of them. Bain and Hara often lunged at people, and one spoke of Bain as if he was born of ancient and malevolent forces. Oh my God. Alex de Laszlo was at a local coffee place when he crossed paths with the canine. Quote, I put my hand on Bain's head. It held a sensation very distinct from any dog I had ever petted before. There was incredible tension. There was something strong and dark about this animal. Another neighbor claimed that birds would start, quote, flying crazily when Bain and Hara walked by. God, this story is like full of just dark, deep evil. But Nora and her husband, Noel, didn't care. They loved the two dogs, perhaps too much. Weeks after Bain killed Diane Whipple, Nora and Noel decided they needed to add a new member to the family. In the short time they'd been caring for Bain and Hara, they'd come to see them as their kids. But after the San Francisco Animal Control officers put down their children, the couple wanted to replace the lost dogs with a human child. Or, well, a full-grown adult. And that's why they adopted Paul Cornfed Schneider. That's insane. That's insane. Marjorie got denied parole back in February of 2023. The husband, Noel, last name Noel, he did 4 years. But, yeah, absolutely crazy, insane story. I really hope you guys enjoyed it. I enjoyed making it. Until next time, peace.